Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. In an unusually long and icy exchange, the U.S. and China criticized each other's policies at their first in-person meeting in Alaska. Washington wants Beijing to change its behavior for relations to thaw out, but the Chinese regime effectively called it delusional thinking. President Biden stumbled as he climbed the stairs to board Air Force One. That was the start of his journey to Atlanta's CDC headquarters. But is the president okay given his recent foot fracture? Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton explains the multi-state lawsuit against Google. It accuses the company of lying to users and eliminating competition in online advertising. The CDC updates its social distancing guidelines for classrooms. Students can now sit closer together in school most of the time. And New York City's mayor suggests police should confront people who act in hurtful ways. This is in response to a rise in anti-Asian violence. A lawyer and former police officer comments on the issue. That and more on NTD News. Top U.S. and Chinese officials clashed in their first in-person meeting under the Biden administration yesterday. The U.S. says it's looking for China to change its behavior if China wants to restore an agreeable relationship.
Top diplomats from the United States and China sparred in a rare extended back-and-forth showdown on public display. Secretary of State Antony Blinken brought up several highly anticipated points on China's threat to democracy and human rights, among others.
Our deep concerns with actions by China, including in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber attacks on the United States, economic coercion toward our allies. Each of these actions threaten the rules-based order that maintains global stability.
Blinken said the alternative to a rules-based order is a scenario where might makes right and winners take all. And he said that would be a far more violent and unstable world for everyone. The night before the meeting, Beijing set its tone, saying the U.S. is basically delusional if it thinks the Chinese Communist Party will compromise. Chinese top diplomat Yang Jiechi fired back, accusing the U.S. of treating its minorities poorly, saying its democracy is struggling and criticizing its foreign trade policies. Yang also referenced Biden's phone call with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, in which the leader of the free world said the two of them need not have a conflict. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the U.S. does not want conflict with China, but it will stand up for its friends and principles.
We'll make clear today that our overriding priority on the United States' side is to ensure that our approach in the world and our approach to China benefits the American people and protects the interests of our allies and partners. We do not seek conflict, but we welcome stiff competition.
Yang propped China up and laid out economic goals.
By the year 2035, China will surely achieve basic modernization. And by the year 2050, China will achieve full modernization.
Sullivan told reporters after the meeting that it seems China basically came to Alaska to put on a show and attract favorable attention to themselves. The two sides appear set to agree on very little during the talks that are expected to continue on Friday.
And the second day of the Alaska meeting has just ended. Coming out of the meeting, Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he knew there were issues where the U.S. is fundamentally at odds with the Chinese regime. These include the regime's actions in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Tibet, and Taiwan.
Including China's actions in Xinjiang with regard to Hong Kong, Tibet, increasingly Taiwan, as well as actions that it's taking in cyberspace. And it's no surprise that when we raised those issues, clearly and directly, we got a defensive response. But we were also able to have a very candid conversation over these many hours.
Blinken says he felt they achieved what they aimed to get out of the meeting. That is, sharing their concerns and clearly laying out the administration's policies, priorities, and worldview. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says they'll now go back to Washington and take stock of where they are. The first high-level talk between China and the U.S. is wrapping up, but besides its fiery exchanges, the meeting also came with an unexpected outburst. NTD's Juliet Song has more on that.
Well, good afternoon.
Top U.S. diplomat Antony Blinken opened the Friday meeting with a 2-minute talk. He said the U.S. would discuss concerns over China's human rights abuses and military aggression.
Our intent is to be direct about our concerns, direct about our priorities, with the goal of a more clear-eyed relationship between our countries moving forward. Thank you for being here.
But top Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi fired back with an over 15-minute-long monologue in Chinese. Yang accused the U.S. of having a Cold War mentality and labeled U.S. criticism over China's actions in Xinjiang and Hong Kong as interfering with China's internal affairs. The translator later relayed Yang's speech in English. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi followed with another 4-minute speech. The U.S. diplomats responded with a brief rebuttal. The U.S. delegation later accused Chinese officials of breaking diplomatic protocols. A Biden administration official told reporters that the two sides agreed to a 2-minute speech beforehand, but that China violated the rules. The official, who asked not to be identified, said the Chinese diplomats seemed to have arrived intent on grandstanding, focused on public theatrics and dramatics over substance. The official also adds that the fiery response from the Chinese side looked like a show for its domestic audience. Back home, the Chinese Communist Party's media mouthpiece is telling a different story. State broadcaster China Central Television accused the U.S. of going way overtime during opening remarks, and said the U.S. launched a groundless attack on China's domestic and foreign policy. Most Chinese citizens can only access news from state-controlled sources because of internet censorship. That's unless they can break through Beijing's censorship firewall using a special software. Because of the Chinese media's angle, many internet users applauded the Chinese diplomats. One user said, "It was ridiculous of the U.S. said to be so rude." But another user pushed back against the Chinese-sized media coverage, saying the U.S. only talked for about 2 minutes, while Yang Jiechi talked for over 10 minutes. So who went overtime? The user also dared Chinese media outlets to live stream the full, unedited meeting for Chinese citizens. Juliet Song, NTD News.
President Biden tripped 3 times while walking up the stairs to board Air Force One. It happened just before he departed Washington, heading to Atlanta. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more on the fall and Biden's visit to the CDC.
On a day with about 15-mile-per-hour winds in Washington, President Biden scurried up the steps towards Air Force One. And on his way, the 78-year-old stumbled once and quickly got up and then tripped again and then fell to his knee. He took a moment to get up and brushed off his pants. Then he finishes his march up the stairs and into the plane. Biden suffered a foot fracture in November when he was playing with his dog. That was his right foot. And here it appears Biden stumbled after putting weight on his right foot. It looks like his second fall happened because he missed a step. But he's not the only president to take heat for his stride. Former President Gerald Ford stumbled down the steps of Air Force One in 1975 and never lived it down with Saturday Night Live skits poking fun at him. And President Trump walked very slowly and carefully down what was said to be a slippery ramp at West Point without falling, and he was ridiculed for it. At the time, Biden commented on the way Trump walks, saying, "Look at how he steps and look at how I step. Watch how I run up ramps and he stumbles down ramps, okay? Come on." But luckily, the president is just fine after the incident. That's according to the White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. She said Biden's 100% fine after tripping. When he arrived in Atlanta, Biden visited the CDC headquarters. The president thanked the CDC staff for their help handling the pandemic and offered some remarks.
Science is back. No, all kidding aside, think about it. For the longest time, not just as it relates to CDC, but science. Science was viewed as sort of an appendage to anything else we were talking about. But it's back.
Vice President Harris also spoke. She lauded the president for his commitment to science and called the CDC a template for other nations.
But I will say that I do believe that this administration, with the leadership of our president, is without any question about science.
The CDC director, Dr. Walensky, thanked Biden and Harris and said her agency is committed to bringing back the health of the American people. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
The CDC's made a big change to school guidelines. What was a 6 feet rule for social distancing is being cut down a few notches. NTD's Miguel Moreno has that update and more on the pandemic.
K-12 students can now do with less personal space. The CDC says 3 feet is the new minimum, down from 6. And if you're in a band, you might have to take it outside.
In common areas in the school, when masks cannot be worn, such as when eating, during activities such as singing, band practice, sports, exercise, and other activities that can increase exhalation, these activities should be moved outdoors or to large, well-ventilated spaces when possible.
But masks aren't going away, and middle to high school students have to stick to the original 6 feet rule if their school's community has a high infection rate. Now let's take a look at the AstraZeneca vaccine. A lot of European countries put a pause on this vaccine when some people reported developing blood clots after getting it, while the European Medicines Agency finished its review, giving it a pass.
The committee has come to a clear scientific conclusion. This is a safe and effective vaccine. Its benefits in protecting people from COVID-19 with the associated risks of death and hospitalization outweigh the possible risks.
She also said it isn't associated with an increase in the overall risk of blood clots. Over 17 million people have gotten the AstraZeneca vaccine. The drug maker says at least 37 people reported developing blood clots. Actually, the U.S. is sitting on a pile of unused AstraZeneca vaccines. The drug maker hasn't asked the FDA to allow its use in the U.S. So President Biden agreed to send millions of them to his neighbors, 1.5 to Canada, 2.7 million to Mexico. Here's the Mexican president.
Le agradezco en especial.
I am especially grateful to President Biden because I've been discussing the issue for close to 2 months.
Desde hace cerca de 2 meses.
These are loans, so the White House says they'll eventually have to pay it back with the same number of doses. And finally, let's go over the CCP virus trends. The 7-day case average is falling, but slowing down. It fell to a 53,450 case average on Thursday. We still have a death average of over 1,000, but new hospital admissions continue their descent. That's it for this roundup. Back to you, Steph.
Thanks, Miguel. And Press Secretary Jen Psaki confirms that 5 White House staffers are no longer employed for their previous marijuana use. In order to work at the White House, staffers need security clearance and must answer questions about marijuana and other drug use. Psaki told CNN that there were additional factors that contributed to the firing of the 5 staff members. On Twitter, she noted these individuals were from a pool of hundreds of people and that this administration is working so past marijuana use doesn't automatically disqualify staff from serving in the White House. It's unclear how many people were disqualified before getting the job or how many were suspended or penalized for marijuana use. Marijuana use is legal in some states, but it's still illegal at the federal level. And both good news and bad news for Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene today. The House will likely not move forward with her expulsion resolution, but the Congresswoman also got her Twitter account banned for half a day. NTD's Allison Lee has the details.
Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene will likely not have to face an expulsion vote on the House floor. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi suggests she does not agree with the resolution that seeks to expel Greene.
Members are very unhappy about what happened here, and they can express themselves the way they do. What Mr. Gomez did is his own view, and that is not leadership position.
Earlier on Friday, Democrat Congressman Jimmy Gomez introduced a resolution that seeks to expel Greene from Congress. He says this is because of her social media posts before she became a congresswoman. According to Gomez, more than 72 Democrats support the resolution. Greene disavowed her past social media posts when the House voted to strip her of committee memberships in February.
These were words of the past, and these things do not represent me. They do not represent my district, and they do not represent my values.
Meanwhile, Twitter locked Greene out of her personal account for 12 hours earlier on Friday. Her account has close to 400,000 followers. Her campaign says Twitter's move, quote, eliminated any possibility for Congresswoman Greene to defend her reputation, her seat, and most importantly, the votes of 230,000 Georgians in the 14th district on the Twitter platform. Her campaign also denounces this as Twitter's attempt to silence not only her voice, but the voice of Georgians who voted for her. As of Friday afternoon, Greene is back on Twitter again. In her first post following the suspension, she writes, I was just told Twitter suspended me for 12 hours in error. Twitter's official response blames their automated systems for shutting down her account by mistake. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
Texas's Attorney General says Congress isn't taking action to hold big tech accountable, which is why the states have to. The Texas-led suit accuses Google of collecting data and using it for its own benefit. Attorney General Ken Paxton joins NTD's Melina Weiskup to discuss the details of their case and how likely it is to succeed.
Texas's Attorney General Ken Paxton says Google collects around 7,000 data points on every single person.
Whether it's your financial information, your health information, personal information, things that you wouldn't want people knowing about you are all controlled by Google, and they sell it and they monetize that value that should be for the consumer to decide.
That's why Texas, joined by 13 other states and Puerto Rico, are filing an antitrust suit against the tech giant. The suit claims Google eliminates competitive advertising on the internet, and that Google is lying when they brand their search engine as free because consumers pay more than they think.
So they control the bid-ask price, and they basically can get whatever they want from any side of the transaction. And if you don't pay it, you don't have another choice. There's nowhere else to go because they've crushed all the competition or purchased them.
When Facebook tried to compete with them, Google bought them off by making a deal to share a percentage of their profits with Facebook. Congress continues holding antitrust hearings to address the issue, but Paxton says there's more talk than action there. So it's left up to the states to create their own legislation. And he says more than just these 15 states have taken action.
I helped start the first investigation at Google when we had 51 states, and we split up some. There's separate lawsuits. There's the Department of Justice has a lawsuit on search. There's another group of states that have another lawsuit like the Department of Justice lawsuit on search. And then ours is very separate. It's related to advertising dollars, which is where we think all the money is made, which it is.
He says he's confident that his suit over shady advertising will meet with success. The two outcomes he hopes for is that Google will compensate victims who unknowingly lose their personal information to Google, and for there to be a reconstruction in the tech world to pave a path for competitive advertising online. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Paxton says they're aiming to hold a trial next spring and that the tech giant has tried to move the case to Silicon Valley instead of in Texas where they filed it. But Paxton says he doesn't think they have a good argument to pick where the case is heard. Iowa's House voted to ban critical race theory from being taught in public schools, colleges, and the government as part of diversity trainings. It was a 59-38 party line vote. Divisive concepts, they say, including ideas that one race or sex is inherently superior or that people are racist, sexist, or oppressive because of their skin color or sex. Republican Representative Stephen Holt said he rejects the idea that, quote, we must adopt racist ideology and mark each individual as either oppressor or oppressed in order to stop racism and foster inclusiveness. But Democrats stood in opposition. They say this bill stifles free speech and prevents much-needed discussions about race. And coming up, 2 MTA bus drivers get in a dispute over who gets the right of way. Their clash caused a 30-minute traffic jam. And Californians will be able to ride on roller coasters again soon as the state eases its COVID restrictions. That and more on NTD News. As New York inches back to normal life, some vestiges of the once congested city offer a reminder of the Big Apple as it once was. 2 bus drivers had a run-in that held up traffic for half an hour.
You often see bus drivers giving a friendly wave when they cross paths.
Back it up!
But not these two.
I'm going. You're supposed to be right there. You back it up.
These MTA buses got in each other's way and the drivers started arguing. The man filming their dispute called them immature.
Two babies over here. Back it up!
Witnesses said their holdup caused a 30-minute gridlock. Some of the onlookers offered to help one of the drivers back up his vehicle. The MTA said one of the buses had to take a wide right turn because a minivan was illegally parked in the no-standing zone. But the bus ran out of room and was caught short by the second bus, which had stopped at a red light. Some said the second bus should have stopped at a line further back so other buses had enough room to turn. The MTA said both drivers involved were temporarily pulled from service and are under investigation for operational, conduct, and mask violations. Don Tran, NTD News, New York.
With crime in New York City on the rise, one might think that now it's especially important to keep criminals off the streets. But it happened yet again that New York's most infamous prison released a murder suspect by accident. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the story.
Last week's story is repeating itself. Another inmate has been released from Rikers Island by accident. He was jailed for 2 charges, one of them being attempted murder. Now the bail for this attempted murder charge was supposed to be $300,000 and the bail for the other charge only $1. But they accidentally set both bails at $1. Although he was set free, he returned to court with his lawyer on Thursday night, according to ABC News. 22-year-old Nicky Meekins was arrested around 2 weeks ago. He was placed on Rikers Island, which lies in close proximity of Manhattan. One New Yorker said the prison should be more careful.
Check those paperworks, man. You feel me? You got citizens out here, you know, taxpayers, homeowners, people taking their kids to school and stuff like that.
The Daily News reports Meekins was released on Monday after his bail was accidentally set much lower than what it should have been. 6 correction officers and a captain were suspended over last week's mistake. And it's not clear yet what consequences the people involved in this week's release will face. Because so far the Department of Correction only said they would address the error from a personnel and training perspective. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Amid rising concerns of anti-Asian violence, New York City's mayor says it would be good if the police confront people even if they didn't commit a crime. But not everyone agrees. NTD's Christina Kim has that story.
Mayor Bill de Blasio suggested the NYPD or another agency confront people who are accused of hurtful conduct towards Asian Americans, even if the acts aren't criminal.
Being told that what they've done was very hurtful to another person and could, if ever repeated, lead to criminal charges, that's another important piece of the puzzle.
De Blasio said if something might be a crime, the NYPD would investigate that. And people would think twice if the police gives them a call or show up at their door to ask about their behavior. He says this is because people need to know there are consequences. This will help curb the anti-Asian violence, he says. But attorney and former NYPD Captain Robert Brown disagrees.
I think it's an absolutely terrible idea.
Mayor Bill de Blasio says the police department is trained to give warnings. But Brown says it's not true. They're trained to arrest people or summons people. So there's not much officers can actually do when they confront people for non-criminal acts.
You don't want the police interacting with people because they hurt someone's feelings. And especially where that can escalate. It could turn into something much worse.
And he pushes back against the idea that hurtful conduct could turn criminal if it happens enough times. There's no legal grounds for that, he says.
There may be situations that may start out as a minor situation like a car stop or a domestic incident, domestic verbal altercation that may escalate into criminality, right? But being hurtful to somebody isn't criminal, and being hurtful to somebody 2 times or 3 times isn't criminal.
He suggests one way to reduce hate crimes.
What they may want to do is try and figure out if there are patterns, if there are people that may be prone to commit these crimes, and try and prevent them before they happen.
Brown says the country is trying to minimize the number of unnecessary police interactions, and this is the opposite. Especially since crime has risen since the pandemic, resources should go towards stopping violent crime. It's unclear if the NYPD will actually enforce this. We reached out to them for comment, but they didn't get back to us by airtime. Christina Kim, NTD News, New York.
While riding the New York City subway, one woman was pleasantly surprised on her way home when she caught sight of another passenger bottle feeding a kitten. She snapped several pictures showing the man tenderly holding the little creature wrapped in a blanket. She was touched and posted the photos to Instagram. Jillian Rogers is the owner of Pet Rescue Squad, a cruelty intervention and rehoming group for unwanted pets. She said the sight was so heartwarming it restored her faith in humanity, reminding her that good people are out there. And just like in most parts of the country, it's a crime to use certain drugs in California. But over the years, San Francisco has tried to approve bills that allow safe injection sites. NTD's David Lamb speaks to a man who has fought against these bills for years.
California Senate Bill 57 seeks to amend current laws and make room for drug overdose prevention programs in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Oakland counties. The bill passed the Health Committee on March 10th with a 7-3 vote. It's now on its way to another committee. Under SB 57, approved businesses are allowed to have overdose prevention programs or safe consumption sites. Frank Lee from the California Coalition Against Drugs tells NTD that he opposes the bill.
The bill does not require the drug addicts to go for drug rehabilitation after getting an injection. So basically, it encourages them to keep using drugs.
At the injection sites, people may use pre-obtained drugs under the supervision of trained staff. The programs would also provide sterile equipment and support for drug addiction treatment. California State Senator Scott Wiener introduced the bill. Supporters of the bill say these programs, quote, have been operating for years in Europe, Canada, and Australia with proven success. Lee quotes the state's former governor, Jerry Brown, saying it does more harm than good. Brown previously vetoed a similar bill.
We need a comprehensive approach to deal with the problem of drugs, with special emphasis on drug prevention and drug rehabilitation.
According to a bill analysis, support for SB 57 largely comes from healthcare providers and advocates, and these consumption sites, quote, have been shown to reduce health and safety problems. On the other hand, opposition to SB 57 comes from law enforcement. They argue that, quote, there is no pathway to treatment under the bill and that it may normalize substance abuse. The bill also says individuals would not be liable for crimes related to these prevention programs.
So this inevitably will lead to more fatal accidents. Now, even if they take public transportation, they will be a safety concern to the people or police around them, especially if they have taken fentanyl, which can easily cause violent behavior.
Lee says he has been working with the police year after year to fight against SB 57.
This is a bill which paves the way for eventual legalization of all drugs. And this may also set a precedent for other cities to follow.
SB 57 is on its way to the Senate Public Safety Committee. Lee says we may hear back in early April. If passed, the bill would last until January 1st, 2027. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
2 Six Flags theme parks in California will be the first to reopen in the state. Visitors can take the rides from April 1st. Here's NTD's Eileen Eng with more details.
Starting April 1st, both Six Flags Discovery Kingdom in Northern California and Six Flags Magic Mountain in Southern California will reopen their roller coasters and other rides. This after being closed for a year. Members and season pass holders get exclusive days on April 1st and 2nd. The parks will be open to the general public on April 3rd. The 2 parks will open with limited capacity. They will be using the existing reservation system to comply with CCP virus safety protocols. Distance markers are added for all ride lines. Facilities and ride units will be regularly sanitized, and riders will have to keep masks on for rides and attractions. In a statement to NTD, Six Flags Discovery Kingdom said the park would modify seating arrangements to mitigate the effects of shouting on rides, and riders will face in one direction. Earlier this week, the California Amusement Park Association urged theme parks to discourage screaming in order to prevent the spread of the virus. Discovery Kingdom has been partially open for animal attractions since last July. However, Six Flags Water Park Hurricane Harbor Concord will remain closed until further notice. Eileen Eng, NTD News, California.
someone has to find the way to build the Great Dome. Completely new, completely original.
The coronavirus outbreak is the latest wake-up call.
U.S. Senator Ben Sasse put it plainly, the Chinese Communist Party has lied, is lying, and will continue to lie about coronavirus to protect the regime.
In 5 to 10 years, we'll have virtually no manufacturing capacity left for generic drugs. And again, this is 90% of our medicines.
And the world should know, if Hong Kong falls, the whole world falls, okay? Because the Chinese Communist Party is the existential risk of humanity, period.
Since the CCP took power, 80 million people have died from its policies and political campaigns.
They're using our institutions and our norms and our values against us in ways that we hadn't necessarily envisioned towards their own authoritarian agenda.
From the party's great firewall in cyberspace, or to that great wall of sand in the South China Sea.
More repression, more unfair competition, more predatory economic practices, indeed a more aggressive military posture as well.
If we do not meet this threat now, it's going to define our century.
The Chinese regime is blaming the U.S. government for alleged anti-Asian crimes. But a China analyst says the attacks are actually the Chinese regime's fault. NTD's Penny Zhou has more.
The recent shooting in Atlanta has caused heated discussion over alleged anti-Asian discriminations. A man killed 8 people, including 6 Asian women. The suspect denied racial motivation for the attacks, but local police say they are still investigating. When asked about crimes targeting Asian Americans, the Chinese regime's foreign ministry responded on Thursday.
These ugly discriminations are outrageous and distressing.
He then blamed the Trump administration, saying they fanned racism and hatred against the Chinese. Some in the U.S. also argued that U.S. conflicts with the Chinese regime are partially to blame for the racial backlash. But China affairs commentator Tang Jingyuan says there is a logical fallacy in this argument. The Chinese regime is trying to conflate the Communist Party with the Chinese people.
The Communist Party is the one who caused the pandemic. It covered up the outbreak and then allowed it to spread. This has nothing to do with the Asian and Chinese Americans living in other countries.
In early January of last year, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, censored news about the CCP virus outbreak, punished whistleblowers, and destroyed virus samples. It banned Chinese citizens from traveling within the nation, but allowed them to fly internationally.
Asian or Chinese in the United States are also infected by the virus, and some have died. They are all victims of the CCP's cover-up.
He says the regime is actually partially to blame for anti-Asian sentiments.
In Mao's time, he often exported revolutions to other countries. Then in Deng Xiaoping and in Xi Jinping's time, the CCP began to infiltrate countries around the world. That's through their unrestricted warfare. One technique they often use is to take advantage of local Chinese organizations, Chinese immigrants or some students' organizations, and use them to achieve the regime's agenda. This has caused some locals to conflate their sentiments against the CCP with the Chinese people. I think this is one root cause of the problem.
Tang also says the CCP is scapegoating others.
They turned the perpetrator that harmed Asian and Chinese Americans into the U.S. government. The argument is the U.S. government's actions against the CCP is to blame for the harm done to the Asian Americans. If you don't fight against the CCP, they won't be harmed.
But Tang argues the Chinese regime is probably doing worse in terms of racial issues. The CCP has kept an estimated 1 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps in the Xinjiang region. The regime also cancelled Mongolian language teachings in the Inner Mongolia region. It has led to fierce protests among ethnic Mongol students and parents last year. The regime has also targeted other ethnic and religious minorities, including Tibetans and Falun Gong practitioners.
In its own country, it's not just racial discrimination anymore. It's genocide. It's a serious crime.
Tang says the Chinese regime probably just treats race issues as a leverage. It uses this leverage to shift focus when other countries challenge the regime for its disruptive behavior.
The CCP has always had only one mindset when dealing with the international community, that you have to follow all kinds of rules. But the Chinese Communist Party itself never follows any rules.
He says to avoid such traps, countries should clearly separate the communist regime from the Chinese people. But if they stop pushing back against the CCP for the sake of easing racial tension and then allow the CCP to continue infiltrating their countries, it will probably only lead to more negative sentiment against China among the local population. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
The recent Atlanta shooting has spurred a wave of condemnation of violence against Asians. But the local police officials say the crime is not necessarily racially motivated. NTD's Lin Lin spoke with several Chinese Americans about it.
The Atlanta massage parlor shooting suspect, accused of killing 8 people, told police the attack was not racially motivated and that he potentially had a sex addiction.
It's no issue. It can happen to anybody. So it's not related or limited to any certain ethnic group. We cannot draw a conclusion based on individual incidents.
Daniel Lowe says he thinks the media could be using this tragic event to prop up another agenda.
The mainstream media has been promoting or using the so-called identity politics for a long time. And it's time to stop for us all to stop this.
Chinese immigrant Zhe He says the logic behind identity politics echoes the communist philosophy of struggle.
Some politicians want to provoke struggles in every situation, encouraging one group to fight another group, labeling someone as different from others, and creating an environment of struggle.
New Yorker Lucy Tan says the race ratio debate poses a threat to Asian Americans.
The Asian American, even they are working hard, they are very qualified students, and they will be rejected because you are Asian. This is fair.
Tan says she hopes her fellow Americans will watch out for radical narratives.
This is kind of socialist propaganda to destroy United States.
She hopes that by staying aware of underlying narratives, Americans will protect their freedom and the culture it's founded on. Reporting by Lin Lin, NTD News, New York.
Most colleges in China have already lifted lockdown measures, but one university in Guangdong province is not allowing students to leave. Some students took matters into their own hands and fled campus. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more on that.
Students of one Chinese university were spotted fleeing their campus on Wednesday. That's as the school remains under a pandemic-driven lockdown. Most colleges in China have already lifted lockdown measures, but Guangzhou Vocational and Technical University of Science and Technology in South China isn't one of them. On Wednesday, hundreds of students broke through the sealed campus gate. One student told us that the campus has been subject to the harsh restrictions since last semester. Students aren't allowed to leave without special permission. Though professors and staff can come and go freely, something the students have found unfair. On top of that, the university hasn't given its reasons for the extended lockdown, even as other schools reopened. Student life inside the facility hasn't been optimum either. Some have complained about constantly rising cafeteria prices, coupled with a ban on all outside food delivery. Some students also reported becoming ill after eating the school's food. Following Wednesday's exodus, the university hired several dozen more guards to contain students. The university has also levied a new ban, blocking students from posting videos about the situation online. A clip of a makeshift Chinese hospital is drawing attention on social media. It was captured in southwest China's Xishuangbanna region. The video shows patients individually shut inside small cabins. They appear sealed inside. Aside from a small window, patients are seen poking their heads out of as workers deliver food. The person who posted the clip said the hospital patients have all tested positive for the CCP virus and have to quarantine there for 3 weeks. Staying there reportedly costs about $50 a day, and extra fees for medicine and healthcare inspections are charged separately. It is unclear when the video was shot. The person who posted it also noted that Chinese authorities seem to be making good money off of ill patients. Xishuangbanna is an autonomous region in the far south of Yunnan province. It borders Burma, also known as Myanmar and Laos. The area is known as the home of Dai people, an ethnic minority.
Huawei is likely to install its first production facility in France. Despite the opposition of some officials and some among the public, the Chinese group managed to find an agreement at a political level. NTD's David Vives has more.
Around 150 demonstrators protested against Huawei in the French city of Strasbourg. The Chinese tech giant signed an agreement with French authorities to build a facility in the region. But the decision is met with opposition.
All major Chinese businesses are controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. This is something we know for sure. Welcoming Huawei is like allowing this regime to take a foot in France.
The mayor of Strasbourg said she is opposed to Huawei in a press release. For municipal councillor Marina Lafay, the arrival of Huawei is a very bad surprise.
We as elected officials won't tolerate it. We can't welcome those who trampled on human rights.
Banners denounced the spy activities from the CCP.
We have been informed there is a risk of influence coming from the CCP as well as spy activities.
France has 6 R&D Huawei sites, but this will be the first production facility ever built outside mainland China for the group. Strasbourg officials denied the CCP to build in the city, but in December 2020, the Chinese group signed an agreement with the regional council to be located in an industrial zone in the nearby town of Brumat. According to Senator André Gattolin, the case of Huawei installing a facility in the region shows how the CCP manages to influence officials and have a ground in Western countries. He says when some officials refuse a partnership, the CCP uses others' networks to get what it wants.
You see, the Strasbourg mayor refused Huawei, and the department officials were suspicious. But the partnership was made with the region.
Gattolin says he looked into the details of partnership between French officials. He says the Grand Est region, where Strasbourg is located, is one of the regions that has created the most ties with the CCP.
The predecessors of the regional council created bonds, such as twin towns with China, and also other mayors in the region and across France. This is a long-term strategy of the CCP. It has to create multiple partnerships again and again.
The construction of the facility is scheduled to start in 2022. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Coming up, house flipping is heating up and lenders want in on the action. Profits on flips are at record highs. And be careful when filing your taxes online. Hackers are finding new ways to scam U.S. taxpayers. That and much more coming up on NTD News. Low interest rates create an easy money environment with lots of speculation. The CEO of Quill Intelligence, Danielle DiMartino Booth, tells us she sees it in the housing market too. We all know how that ended in 2008. Well, today, profits for flipping houses, buy, fix, sell on, are at record highs. Flippers are making $66,000 on average per home. And lenders, of course, don't want to miss out. More and more are helping flippers finance their operations.
As house flippers hit record numbers, more lenders are willing to help them out. Over 60 lenders are financing flippers, almost a 50% increase in around 2 months. However, it seems only the most experienced flippers are able to make it.
There is a lack of inventory that would otherwise be there were it not for the COVID situation. The most extreme that I have certainly experienced in 30 years, almost 30 years in this industry.
Also, auction and foreclosure proceedings are a huge part of the pipeline that feeds the industry. But because of foreclosure bans, flippers have to get creative.
There are opportunities. I would say that there are less today than there were a year ago today, or maybe 14 months ago. And I would expect that there will be a large supply of inventory coming on the market as we go through 2021, as those moratoriums lift and you see a resurgence of foreclosure and auction activity.
Another big difference, owner-occupant buyers are also purchasing what are normally considered investment properties. Even more competition.
So business is very strong currently. I'm receiving, a great deal of volume in terms of requests for new loan opportunities.
The competition on the lender side is also very high because there are fewer opportunities.
So because of that, the interest of trying to provide financing to the real estate investors is also very high.
So what factors do lenders look for in a borrower who's looking to flip houses?
But the one thing that I really look for primarily is a borrower who has experience, who has a track record of doing investment projects. These people tend to be better equipped to address any issues that come up in the process. And, I feel more comfortable working with those folks as opposed to people who are just trying to get into the industry.
Flippers tend to focus on the lower end of the market. Last year, around 70% of flipped homes sold for less than $300,000. Data firm Adam says the most popular states for flipping homes are Tennessee, Arizona, Alabama, Georgia, and Nevada.
Are you stressed about your taxes? Hackers are hoping that you are and that they can take advantage of it. A cybersecurity firm says a new hacking campaign targets taxpayers with what looks like tax documents. NTD's Phil Zhou reports.
You might want to be careful the next time you check your email. There's a new scam trending on the internet and it's targeting U.S. taxpayers during the tax season.
Right now, the threat is focused on tax season. People are stressed. People are worried. They have a lot on their mind.
Security firm CyberReason uncovered the new phishing scam by cyber criminals.
They found a malware threat disguised as a Word document centered around tax season. It's basically going to be a form that looks like it comes from the IRS.
If you click on the documents or links, hackers can gain control of your computer. They can then steal personal information or even reroute your tax refunds. And the hackers are not alone. Bigger criminal organizations are actually renting out the malware on a subscription basis. Hackers can buy the malware as a service for as little as $10 a month. They even have 24/7 phone support for the cyber criminals.
And if they run into any difficulties or problems, they have helplines. They have customer service. This malware as a service phenomenon is widespread and very insidious as far.
To protect yourself, CyberReason says don't open links or attachments from people you don't know and try to visit company websites directly. When possible, use two-factor authentication, such as a fingerprint reader on your phone or a face reader. And if you can, request a text message providing a security code for your login. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
The All England Lawn Tennis Club announces the Wimbledon Championships will go ahead this year, but the famous ticket queue will not operate and the number of fans will be reduced.
Last year, Wimbledon was cancelled due to the pandemic, the first time since World War II.
This year, the All England Lawn Tennis Club hopes to welcome fans back. Its statement says the most likely outcome for this year's championships as an outdoor venue is a reduced number of spectators within the grounds. But fans can't line up for tickets at the site because of likely social distancing requirements. Normally, fans wait in line for tickets released on the day. Some even camp overnight to snap up tickets, a well-known part of Wimbledon tradition. This year, the Lawn Tennis Association will hold a ticket ballot instead. It will provide an online platform for ticket sales in June. Those who bought tickets through the public ballot last year, but then had them refunded when it was cancelled, will be able to replace them for the same day and court in next year's event instead. AELTC Chairman Ian Hewitt says he is cautiously optimistic about the return to normality, and he hopes the championships will play an exciting role in the move toward that. He added, the AELTC remains humbled and heartened by the passion for Wimbledon shown by fans worldwide. For the tennis players, they will be required to stay at official hotels to minimize the risk of spreading the virus.
Dogs may have enjoyed having their owners at home more, but as lockdowns begin to ease and people return to work, these pooches are showing some behavioral issues. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
Meet Oreo. He loves to jump over this huge log in his local park in London. He's been spending a lot of time with his owner, Denai Sonatanu. Sonatanu found Oreo abandoned as a puppy and has worked hard to calm and train him since then. She ultimately earned a professional qualification from the Institute of Modern Dog Trainers and set up her own dog training business called The Dog Made Me Do It. Sonatanu says 12 months after restrictions first began in the UK, many pandemic pooches have started demonstrating behavioral issues.
Separation anxiety is a big one. Dogs follow their owners around even when the owners go to the next room. They cannot even be left alone when their owners go grocery shopping.
Dog behavior has even become an issue for the country's Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. His dog, Dylan, was recently in trouble for reportedly chewing expensive books and furniture at his country retreat in Buckinghamshire, Chequers.
They don't come with a manual and they don't come pre-programmed, unfortunately. But that's the fun of owning a dog, to be honest.
According to Battersea Dogs and Cats, almost half of new pet owners said they sometimes regret their decision. 73% said their misgivings were due to training problems. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Next, a nonprofit for animals works with police to rescue 2 horses near Madrid. Let's go there now.
Nonprofit Save a Horse in Spain rescued 2 horses suffering on private property near Madrid.
We were told that the care of the horses was not the best. Although they are not in a state of malnutrition, this horse is very thin.
They also did not have the proper documentation required. The Spanish Civil Guard was called to investigate the situation. The 2 groups worked together to rescue the horses. During the removal, the owner said that everything was a mistake. He refused to talk to journalists. The animals are now in Guadalix de la Sierra with 21 other horses. Save a Horse says a judicial process is still needed to determine where the animals will end up.
We generally get possession of the horses. We use them in emotional training to help other people.
The horses are in a separate corral until they adjust to the move.
All of Greece is in bloom as spring comes to the northern hemisphere. NTD's Sapphire Quarter takes us to the idyllic Athenian hillsides.
According to Greek myth, spring comes when Persephone, rising from the underworld, reunites with her mother Demeter after 6 months of separation. The goddess makes all of nature bloom, spreading her joy throughout Greece. But while the beliefs of its inhabitants may change, the beauty of the hillsides around Athens, draped in poppies and daisies, never will. The white flowers of the almond trees hint at the harvest to come. In northern Greece, 43,000 acres of peach trees come into bloom. But there's a loneliness to the scene. Normally, crowds of tourists from as far as Japan and America walk or bike through the rows.
This year we haven't been able to organize any of our activities around the peach blossom trees. However, we always hope, as the spring comes and blooms on these trees around us, that soon spring will come back to our daily lives after the pandemic is over.
And maybe there's something to this wish. Spring is coming on March 20th, a day earlier than it's normally celebrated. Sapphire Quarter, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.